Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I am your fill-in host for the day, Dan Harris. With me, of course, is Mike Tagliere and Kyle Yates. You can find us on Twitter at DanHarris80, at Mike Tagliere NFL, and at Kyle Y NFL. Guys, how you doing?
Well, back from a weekend, which is always a nice thing. You get kind of refreshed over the weekend. Unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world as we know it right now, but we're trying to give you an escape from all of that to talk some football.
Yeah, Tags, you and I were talking a little bit about this before we recorded. Obviously, there is an incredible amount going on in the country, in the world as of right now. I'm sure, we all have our own thoughts and opinions on whatever it is, but this is a fantasy football podcast, and the way we kind of look at it is, if you're listening to this, you're probably listening for our fantasy football takes, and that's what we're kind of going to stick to throughout this podcast. So it's certainly not a commentary on anything. That's just why you're here. That's what we want to do. So that's what we'll stick. How about you, Yates? How was your weekend? I saw nice pictures of you and your son taking a nice little walk.
Yeah, we have we went out to Grand Haven. I'm in Michigan, so we went out to Grand Haven. We're out by the lake there, and then we've started. We got some bikes over the weekend too, so we've done some bike rides here. I've got the bike trailer behind, so now not only am I pushing myself up heavy like steep hills, I'm now carrying like a ton of weight with him in the back, which is a ton of fun. My quad, I might look like Saquon by the end of the summer. Quadzilla.
Yeah, you already look like Saquon.
Right,
don't worry about it
yep.
at all.
I get confused for him all the time.
Yeah, well, as for me, I cleaned out my garage, as you guys both know. Only 2 dead animals, so pretty good.
Oh,
no
congrats.
No possums, just chipmunks. All good. So we're good. But you know what? Let's get into some fantasy football. Okay, by the way, in case you're wondering, Bobby apparently has a concussion from playing basketball. Yeah. So this is why I avoid doing any athletic activity whatsoever, because I fear getting injured. But he'll be back, I'm sure, health permitting, later in the week. So that'll be all good. So today we're going to be talking about our top 10 fantasy fades, guys who we're fading related to our expert consensus rankings. Now, before we get into the show, I want to announce... hold on. I should not knock out my headphones before I'm doing that. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Okay. All right, now before we do that, we have a winner of our Alvin Kamara helmet giveaway. It is, congratulations, Scott from Texas. When you get it, make sure you post it on social media so we can all share in your joy. Now, for our newest contest, we're giving away a wallet from Fielder's Choice. Now, guys, you both have wallets, right, from Fielder's Choice?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, do you love it as much as I do? Now, you guys both have NFL in your Twitter handle, okay? So I am both, an analyst for NFL, but also MLB. I love baseball. I live for baseball. The wallets, as you guys can attest to, they're made of vintage baseball glove leather. They smell like baseball. When you think of baseball, that's what they smell like. They're really amazing. Do you guys love them or what?
It brought me back to my childhood. I played baseball growing up more than I played football. So I was a big baseball fan. And when I opened that wallet and you smell it, that's exactly the thing. Like, that's my favorite part of baseball. Like, when you'd open your glove for the year, you'd oil it and do all those things. And then you'd smell it, like the smell of a glove. It's like a smell of a book, right? It's unmistakable. And you kind of love that smell. So having it in a wallet is pretty nice.
Oh, yeah, I love it. I mean, the same thing with tags. I played baseball growing up, so I remember, getting my new glove and would put it under my pillow, sleep on it to kind of break it in, and having that smell. Like, that's what this reminded me of. I love my wallet.
Yeah, no, I definitely do too. So to be entered, it's our usual standard contest giveaway. All you got to do is leave a review for the show on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Send a screenshot of that review to contest@fantasypros.com. But really, it's great. Mine is monogrammed. It's really awesome, and it really reminds you of, like you said, kind of growing up as a kid with baseball.
What is Woody's last name, by the way?
I mean, don't do that. Don't do that. In case you don't know, Tags calls me Woody from Toy Story because when we were doing some training, and you guys should be watching on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/fantasypros, you could see me. I talk with my hands, and I'm skinny, and so my hands are kind of flailing all over the place, and it's a little like Woody from Toy Story. And I take offense to it if it wasn't 100% accurate. So it's fine. Anyway, let's get into today's show. Both Kyle and Tags are going to be giving their top fantasy football fades. So these are top, 10 players, or not even their top, but they're 10 players that they are sort of fading in comparison to our expert consensus rankings. Again, I'm going to stress this, and I think I could speak for both of you. This is not avoid. This is not do not draft. Like, there are no do not draft. Everybody has a price. If they fall far enough, Tags and Yates would both draft all of the guys on their list. But these are guys based on their expert consensus rankings who right now they're avoiding. So, Tags, why don't you start us off? Who is, let's count down from 10, whatever order you want to do, but who's 10 on your top 10 fantasy fades?
Well, I'm going to start with the one that just pops to mind the most because I want people to remember this one the most. And this is a guy that I probably wouldn't draft in a half PPR doesn't matter, like a 12-team league with standard settings, like 15, 16-man rosters. I do not think that I would draft Austin Hooper. He's right now the ECR on him is tight end number 9. I have him down at 15. I feel like he's nothing more than a streamer in this offense. Kevin Stefanski coming in, he's not going to want to throw the ball a ton. And so when you cut that back and you look at Kareem Hunt, you look at Nick Chubb, they added pieces of the offensive line. They want to run the ball like they did in Minnesota last year. And they used a lot of 2 tight end sets. That's why they kept David Njoku on that. They grabbed his option. They drafted another tight end, Harrison Bryant. So you look at that and you're like, all right, they're going to use 2 tight ends, so Hooper's going to be on the field, right? And they paid him more than any other tight end in the league. The problem is, when you go and look at like the Vikings last year, you look at that team, they didn't have nearly as many options available in that offense, yet, Irv Smith Jr. and Kyle Rudolph, those guys, neither of them top 50 targets during the season. So when you look at tight ends, all you're looking for is opportunity. You're just looking for targets every single week. That's why Mike Gesicki was a guy that people started down the stretch. Ryan Griffin, those guys were getting targets. You cannot get consistent targets from Austin Hooper this year. He's going to be a streamer at best, and I think you're only going to want to start him in weeks that you're projecting them for high pass attempts, like in a game that they're going to fall behind. With that defense, and if Stefanski is the coach that we all think that he's going to be, I think this team, I don't think they're going to be trailing by double digits very often. So I'm going to go ahead and say that Austin Hooper is someone that I probably wouldn't even draft at all.
Out of curiosity, Yates, where do you stand on Hooper? Tag said ECR of 12. High, low, or right there?
No, ECR is 9. His ECR is 9.
Oh, I'm sorry. ECR is 9. Oh,
yeah,
boy, that's a sneak preview. Harris ranking 12. Okay, so we're going to get into that. Yates, don't let that influence you, okay? You stick to your guns wherever you got him.
Well, it's super funny. I have him at 12.
Yes,
but like looking at of course. But like looking at the projected point totals, like I do mine based on stat projections, and those are my rankings. I try to stick pretty true to them. If I take away one, big play away from Austin Hooper, if I take away one touchdown, he drops down my rankings. These guys are all kind of just mashed together in the middle there. So I do have him at tight end 12, but he's not someone who I feel super great about drafting. Like I think based on where we're gonna see his ADP land in July, August, like that's just gonna be a price that I'm not willing to pay. I'm with Tags on that one.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm 12, so we are all bearish compared to consensus for sure. And I agree with you. When I look at my rankings, tight end is usually a wasteland. I feel a little bit better about it this year, which sort of speaks to Hooper, being pushed back. But again, the only thing that kind of keeps me, keep where he is that when you look at Mayfield's career, and I get this is a different offense, so, you may not want to necessarily translate all these numbers, but he's thrown more than a third of his touchdown passes to tight ends. And it's not like he's had great tight ends to necessarily throw to. So whether that's just something that he does where he feels comfortable near, in the red zone or as you get close to the goal line, or whether or not it's something that was more of a product of the offense. He does seem to like to target tight ends near the end zone. Now you've got David Njoku here, and you've got Stefanski's new offense. So that is something that probably Tags. I feel like when you get down Yates, I'm the same way as you. I mean, the difference between my projections for tight end 12 and tight end 17 are nothing, Right. So you can make minimal stuff. But I think that's in the end what keeps him there for me. The fact that Mayfield throughout his career has generally liked to target tight ends, at least near the end zone. So, but I have no problem with it. We're all bearish on it. So there you go, Tags. No fights here, really, with that one. All right, Yates, who do you got? Number 10.
Yeah, so number 10, I mean, looking at these kind of rankings, it was kind of stretching to find that 10th guy. But Tags mentioned him when he was talking about Austin Hooper. I'm going to go with Irv Smith Jr. Irv Smith Jr. is currently ranked in ECR as the tight end 23. I have him down at tight end 37. So I just think that you're talking about this offense and trying to find passing volume for Irv Smith. It's going to be very, very hard to do unless you see Adam Thielen, miss some games again. If Dalvin Cook isn't a factor in the passing game, it's just going, especially with Kyle Rudolph there. If something were to happen to Kyle Rudolph, he goes, he injures himself in the second game. Again, I don't wish that upon anyone, but if that happens, Irv Smith, I think, doesn't necessarily just shoot up and skyrocket into a top 10 tight end for the season. I think that he's going to be in this 15 to 20 range where you can feel like, okay, I can put him in some matchups and feel okay about it. But I'm going to be one of those guys that just says, I'm off on Irv Smith until Kyle Rudolph either retires or, leaves in free agency, which isn't going to happen anytime soon because he signed a contract extension, if I'm remembering correctly. So Irv Smith Jr. is someone who I'm way lower on because I just can't find the targets for him in this offense.
Well, if there is one fantasy player that has caused, the really peak of divisiveness in the fantasy community, it's Irv Smith Jr., who everybody has all over. That's a joke, guys. Where do you have, out of curiosity, Irv Smith Jr.?
That's what I was just looking at. 24.
Yeah, that's where I am, actually. Same thing at 24.
Yeah, so I mean, we're both lower than the consensus. I don't think it's crazy. I just don't think the ceiling's there for him. I think to be real, once you get outside the top 12 tight ends, 13 tight ends, then you're in streaming material. These are not guys that I want to draft on my fantasy team. You can kind of grab one at the end of your draft that has a good matchup, and we're going to be doing articles throughout the offseason that are going to highlight those good early season matchups for streaming purposes, but he's not someone that you're going to trot out there every single week because Kyle Rudolph is still there. Kyle Rudolph was the guy. I've actually started going through the Vikings projections, and Rudolph has always been the guy in the red zone. Even though that they were almost identical in targets, you saw Kyle Rudolph score 6 touchdowns compared to Irv Smith's 2. It's because Cousins, he knows him, he trusts him in the red zone. So I don't know if that changes. It might come closer to being, toe-to-toe where it's 4 or 5 touchdowns apiece. And that's just not enough for me to start him on a weekly basis or even get close to it. So I know that this is Yates is number 10. It was kind of a reach in a way because I don't know if anybody's really drafting Irv Smith very high. But at the same time, I think we're all on the same page in terms of he's not a breakout star with Kyle Rudolph there.
Yeah, and look, I think it's fair. It's obviously deeper, than most normal fantasy leagues, but you now have sort of this trend to bonus points per tight end. You've got, the Scott Fishbowl always gives massive points for tight ends and larger leagues where you're drafting 2, maybe even 3. So it's fair to say, once you get to that, range, Tags and I both have him close to ECR as a low end tight end too, and Yates is, way lower than that. So I think that that's completely fine. Tags, let's move on to number 9 for you.
All right, number 9. This is not really any particular order because I want to state that when you're talking about ECR, the expert consensus ranking, it takes all the experts we have in our database and it puts them all together and forms one consensus ranking. So it's a lot of sharp guys putting together their rankings. So these are not, again, Dan already mentioned. I just want to stress the fact that these are not guys that we're saying do not draft, but more so I don't like where the consensus has them because X. So number 9, I'm going to say that it's Chris Carson at RB17. He's someone that's going to go up and down, and I think I'm going to adjust my ranking based on what I hear in the preseason. But knowing that the Seahawks were out there, they were talking to Devonta Freeman, they ended up signing Carlos Hyde. They have Rashaad Penny, who's expected to start on the PUP list. They drafted DJ Dallas. There's just so much going on here. Chris Carson did not have surgery on his hip, but at the same time, it was a bad hip injury that forced him to shut down for the season. So a hip injury, I'm a little bit more concerned than I am about a torn ACL. ACL, it's as long as you go through the time frame that you need to heal it, you're going to be okay. I'm not worried about ACLs anymore, but hips are a little bit different. It's he's a bruising running back too, a guy that, he hasn't been the model of consistency when it comes to staying healthy either. So at RB17, you're paying for, I know that he had a great year in 2019. He was actually one of the most underrated fantasy players, but he was also always teetering on your bench because you were okay, he fumbled again. What is Pete Carroll actually going to do? And then we saw Carroll, right before Rashaad Penny get hurt, slowly start to make that somewhat of a 50-50 timeshare. I am concerned about Chris Carson a little bit. I love that offense. So this can move, but as of right now, there's just too many question marks surrounding this backfield.
So what's the number out of curiosity, Tex? I don't think you ever gave that where you have him versus, you said 17 is consensus. Where are you on him?
I have him at RB22 right now. That's basically our full round difference.
No, that's a fade. You don't have to justify. That's a fade for sure.
Yeah.
Yates, what about you out of curiosity?
Yeah, I currently have him at 19, but that's just based on the fact that I need more information before I fully determine how many, right now I have him projected for, let me pull it up, sorry. I have Chris Carson projected for 196 rushing attempts and 7 touchdowns. So I think that, that's right now. If we find out that he's not coming back perfectly healthy from that hip, if we're going to, we're hearing that Carlos Hyde is going to take more of the work in those first 6 weeks, I'll adjust based on that. But for right now, this is a team that's going to run the ball. And Chris Carson, just the rushing attempts have to go to someone. They may as well go to Chris Carson at this stage of the game.
Yeah, I'm in line with consensus. I'm at 17, and I'm a little more bullish on him in terms of projections. The three of us have been talking because we each do our own projections. I'm at 235 carries, so I'm more bullish. This is a guy, though, who's, again, Tags, you mentioned it. The news as we get into camp and everything like that is going to be critical because you have no idea. If he is, all the reports, as far as I've read, have been pretty optimistic on what he's at. I don't view the Carlos Hyde signing as anything. You knew they were going to bring in another guy because I think that's more about Penny and the fact that he is going to start the year on the pup list. You need somebody else. And Tags, I remember because we do the Sunday night recap shows, and we almost every time would be like, oh, man, this has to be it for Carson. This is it. Look at this. It's like the fumbles, the nonstop fumbles. But again, I went back and looked at it. He lost a fumble in each of his first 3 games, and you were like, all right, this is it. Next game, 22 for 104. Next game, 27 for 118. Next game, 24 for 124. So he got back later in the season, 4 fumbles in a 3-game stretch. The next game, 23 for 102 and a touchdown, 15 for 76, 24 for 133. I get. Go ahead.
If we pretend for a minute that Rashaad Penny didn't tear his ACL at the end of last year, remember like those 2 games where it was basically a 50-50 timeshare?
Yep.
Who would we have ranked higher right now? Like, let's say that they were both healthy. Who would we have ranked higher? Because Rashaad Penny was the guy coming up, whereas Chris Carson was the guy you had to worry about. Granted, they never benched him because Penny had some health issues at the beginning of the year as well. I don't know who I'd have ranked higher if they were both healthy.
Be that as it may, they both aren't healthy. This is the situation we find ourselves in. And with Carson right now looking like he's projected to be pretty much full strength. I agree with you. Hips are scary for sure. But the fact that he's projected as of this point to be full strength, I really see no reason why they're going to get away from him. Not Carlos Hyde. Sorry. I mean, I've seen enough of Carlos Hyde, and he had a fine year last year, but he strikes me as much more of somebody who's insurance,
Right. Well, I mean, there was a reason why he was still on the market at this stage, right? Yeah.
And they went for Freeman, to be clear. Freeman could have signed if he wanted to. They offered to him first. But anyway, look, we're not crazy different. I mean, 22 is a fade. I'm at 17. I think Yates, who said 19. But, again, this is a guy who I think is one of the backs who's most prone to move based on how the news comes out as we get into camp. All right. Let's go on to your next one, Yates. Who do you have here at number 9?
Yeah, for me, that's Jared Cook. He is currently ECR tight end 10. I have him down at tight end 21. Listen to this, guys. Jared Cook scored 9 touchdowns on only 65 targets last season. So the league average for yards per touchdown at the tight end position last year was 130.67. So that means every 130 yards at the tight end position, they were scoring a touchdown on average. Cook scored a touchdown every 78 yards, which suggests regression is coming. That's just an astronomical feat, to try to replicate. So there's no way I think that he can repeat that number this season, and they've added in competition at his position in Adam Troutman. They traded away essentially the entire remainder of their draft to go get Adam Troutman. Now, I believe that he's the long-term replacement there for Jared Cook. I don't think he's going to be necessarily a huge factor this year, but he does take away some work. I think they're going to want to get him onto the field, and they're going to want to get him adjusted to the NFL, speed of play, which he's coming out of Dayton. He needs to adjust. So I think that Troutman is going to see some work, which takes away overall targets away from Jared Cook. Given that, and added to the fact that he scored a touchdown every 78 receiving yards, just doesn't scream that that's able to be replicated this upcoming season. So I'm fading Jared Cook big time.
Tags, there's no way you have him close to 21, right?
I don't have him at 20. No, I'm at 11. I'm with Yates in the fact that he's going to regress. The touchdowns were over and above what he should have. Now, he did miss 2 games. I don't know if that's expected to continue, but I'm not worried about Emmanuel Sanders, them losing Ted Ginn. Jared Cook, it's his second year in the offense. Last year was the first year in the offense. This guy, he's kind of in the prime. I don't want to say the prime of his career. He's towards the end of that prime of his career. And Drew Brees missing a couple games in the season. That's going to bring down some of his totals because they didn't throw the ball nearly as much with Bridgewater. Bridgewater, I want to say, targeted Michael Thomas on 33% of his pass attempts, which is kind of ridiculous. So when you look at it, there is going to be regression, but it's all about, like, when you look at the tight ends here outside the top 6, I mean, you could start to talk about those guys and say, okay, if someone is going to break regression, who is it? Who has the best quarterback? It's not, Hunter Henry doesn't have the best quarterback. Tyler Higbee doesn't have the best quarterback. Rob Gronkowski, is he even going to stay healthy enough to be on the field? Hayden Hurst, I like a lot, and I have Hayden Hurst over Jared Cook. But Jared Cook is a guy that over Goddard, over Hawkinson, over Fant, over Hooper, I would take him over those guys just because I feel like he has the best chance to score a touchdown on a weekly basis because of who his quarterback is.
Yeah, he had 11 end zone targets last year, most of any tight end. I think, the one thing that I don't disagree that regression is going to happen for Cook, but he can regress and still be a tight end 1, right? I mean,
that's why I'm at 11.
Exactly.
Right.
He finished last year 7th, among tight ends in half PPR scoring. So look, I don't disagree that regression is coming 21st though. Yates, that's a big drop. I like it. I like the boldness. I have him personally just at 10th, which I believe is what we said ECR is. But again, once you get down to that range, I still think Cook for me is certainly a tight end 1. He's one of the guys. But again, once you start getting to that back end tight end 1, maybe high end tight end 2, there's very little difference between any of them. But that's bold. I like it, Yates. Way to take a stand. And that's my nice way of saying I completely disagree with you.
Right.
And
for sure.
Right. Of course. Tags. Number 8, please. Go ahead.
All right. I'm going to go with this guy that's being drafted as the wide receiver 43, or I should say ranked by experts as the wide receiver 43. He overcame a lot, Emmanuel Sanders, to come back and do well. But let's be real, guys. He's, what is he, 33, 34 years old now? I think he just turned 33. He's a guy that came off the Achilles. He surprised everyone by coming back, and then he had a few big games here and there, leading you to believe that he's totally over it. I like Emmanuel Sanders, the guy. I love the story that was behind it all, and like him coming back from that injury that really nobody ever did. He is back as a fine player, and he's going to be a fine role player for the Saints. That does not mean you want to rely on him in fantasy. When you're drafting someone as the wide receiver 43, that means you're taking a guy that you're probably not going to start for most weeks, right? And Emmanuel Sanders is never going to be the guy that's going to explode off your bench. He's not someone that you're going to be like, oh, I'm going to throw him in here because he's going to explode. He's a guy that you're going to throw in your lineup to get a decent floor. He's a reliable receiver. He has Drew Brees thrown to him, but you're not going to get any massive weeks. Michael Thomas is that dude, and that's the reason Traquan Smith hasn't really broken out. Traquan Smith hasn't been bad on a target-by-target basis, but there's just not enough to go around with that wide receiver core. At 43, I mean, guys like Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks are going in that region, so it's like, those are guys that I would much rather have. They're going to get a consistent flow of targets. They have boom upside. I'm just not into Emmanuel Sanders at wide receiver 43.
How much lower do you have him, Tags?
I have him quite a bit lower. My ranking on him is 56, I think.
Okay, that's big. Yates, agree, disagree?
I totally agree with Tags because I have him at wide receiver 56.
Wow.
Wow. We did it, Tags.
I'm proud. I'm proud.
Right. Well, this is really not. There are plenty of places throughout this football season where we are going to strongly disagree. Unfortunately, this seems like one of them, but I don't. This is not a player who I'm like, yeah, man, what's wrong with you guys? How could you have him that low? Because I do have him basically right in line with consensus. But it's not like I'm like, ooh, boy, I love Emmanuel Sanders this year. I'm super excited about him. But look, he was a 26th wide receiver in half PPR scoring last year. He was a 21st the year before. He's got an elite catch rate. He's got an incredibly accurate quarterback. If the idea is not, I mean, we could talk about targets if you want, but if the idea, he's not going to get touchdowns, I get it, that's going to limit his ceiling. He's not the high upside guy that you might like, once you get into that range necessarily, but he does strike me as a guy who you are going to be able to stick into your lineup most weeks in half PPR format if you have to. Again, not a starter. He's outside the top, 36 and wide receivers. But overall, I don't know. I have him, I believe I have him 41st or something. So I'm right in line with consensus. So again, it's not one where I desperately want to take a stand on because Tags, we always used to allude to this last year. Once you get down to that range, again, sort of like tight ends, there's not that much separating the guys once you get to, like 40 to 50.
Right. So why not take a chance on a guy that has tons more upside than Emmanuel? Like, what's best case scenario for Emmanuel Sanders at this point in his career? Like, wide receiver 26?
I mean, best case scenario, and again, talking about, I never want to wish injury upon anyone, but what happens if Michael Thomas goes down, right? But like, you never want to go in and like draft Emmanuel Sanders in the hopes of, Michael Thomas gets injured and then suddenly he gets the majority of the targets there. You never want to do that as a draft strategy because you're going to get frustrated with it and you're going to drop Emmanuel Sanders week 3 into the season.
Yeah, but see, the thing that I view about Sanders, and again, I don't want to spend too much time because we've got a lot of names to get to, is, that potential does exist. If Michael Thomas went down, what would Sanders rank as rest of season? Like,
that's what I'm saying. Like, I think I'd put him around wide receiver 25. I don't.
Even if Michael Thomas went down?
Yeah, I don't think that he would be like a target hog. I think Traquan Smith would actually become somewhat of a fantasy option, like almost like he would walk into wide receiver 4 territory, and you'd have Sanders flirt with the wide receiver 2-3 territory. I don't think that either of them would be someone that I would want to like go all in on as a top 20 receiver for the rest of the year.
All right. Well, if let's hope we don't have to get there, because I think for all fantasy football players and just generally, you don't want to wish an injury on Michael Thomas. Sure. But I would have him top 20. And I think, again, this is something where I need to go through the projection and everything like that, but I don't think I would hesitate as being the number one dog in that offense. But anyway, let's move on here. Let's go. Yates, you're up for number 8.
Yeah, this one is really confusing to me, guys, and maybe you can talk me into it. It's Derrius Guice. He's RB31 in ECR. I have him at RB55 based on a projection standpoint. This is a new coaching staff. There are several other running backs on this roster, and it's an inability to remain healthy. Excuse me. Even if you project Guice to be the starter and remain healthy for all 16 games, we have no idea how these injuries have taken a toll on his body and what's his actual production going to look like. Is he going to be able to cut as smoothly as he was coming out of college? I loved him coming out. He was a phenomenal talent and he had an enormous ceiling. But at this point, with the new coaching staff, there are just too many variables there for me to feel confident in saying that Derrius Guice is going to finish as an RB3 this season, which is where he's being ranked currently in ECR.
Tags, counterpoint.
I debated putting him on my list of top 10 considering he was being drafted there, but then I also thought about it and I said, you know what, around that territory in the RB31 range, you have to take a chance on someone, right? It's either you draft someone like him or you take someone like Phillip Lindsay, right, who he's going to have a role, sure, but you know that Phillip Lindsay's not the lead dog. You know that he's not walking into a workhorse role with Melvin Gordon there. You're taking a chance on someone like maybe like Sony Michel in that territory and someone who's been inefficient. So for someone taking Guice there, I get it. I have him at 37, RB 37. So I felt like he is overvalued right now, but at the same time, that area of the draft I don't feel confident in. And looking at all the running backs they have on the roster, like Adrian Peterson bringing him back for a year, Bryce Love when they drafted him at the top of the 4th round, it absolutely made no sense, but they apparently loved him. He's in the roster. Then they go out and get Antonio Gibson, who's going to be treated like maybe like a Chris Thompson in this offense. So I don't know how I feel about any of this.
Don't forget, by the way, Peyton Barber and J.D. McKissick are still there too, right? It's all trash. It's just it's all bad. And Darius Guice, for what it's worth, I was never huge on Guice coming out of college. I thought he was fine, but I was never huge on him. But I still think, I mean, if he came back, it's somewhat close to the same player. He's still the best running back on that team. So getting a starting running back at RB31, that's why I was like, I didn't put him on my list, but I definitely debated it. Yeah, I've got him at 34. So I'm quote unquote bearish as compared to consensus. But again, I think that's the point, Tags. When you have a running back, he's got more upside than most of the guys going in that range. I agree, Yates. There are plenty of reasons to doubt. And I mean, how many games has he played in his 2 seasons? 5, I believe it is. So health is obviously a concern in the long-term effects of all those injuries. But if they clear out some of this logjam, and if somehow let's say he has an incredible week 1, and then just kind of runs with it, he might be somebody who could be a guy you start. Again, that offensive line, by the way, is bad. So it's not something where you're going to be super excited about him anyway. But at that range where it's like a borderline RB3, I'm willing to take the chance on his upside there.
Yeah.
All right, Tags. Next up.
All right, this one's weird, and I'm going to put him at number 7 just because he's currently ranked as the wide receiver 7. I don't know how Kenny Golladay got there. I like Golladay, the player, and I hate betting against good players, but why is he the wide receiver 7? Like, he's being drafted over guys like Allen Robinson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Mike Evans, guys that are locked into targets. They're the clear-cut number 1 on their team. Kenny Golladay with Marvin Jones in the lineup, I don't know if people realize this, they've been relatively similar production. Like, Marvin Jones has dealt with injuries, and he's been on and off the field. I understand why you want to draft Golladay. He's ascending, one's descending. I get that. But it's a much closer gap, and we had this conversation last year, too, is that it's a much closer gap than people realize, and when Marvin Jones is back on the field in week 1, which he is, he's healthy, he's in the final year of his contract. It's Kenny Golladay is going to be a wide receiver 2 rather than a wide receiver 1 most weeks. When you're taking in someone at wide receiver 7, that's like elite production every single week. And Kenny Golladay just hasn't done that to this point of his career. Again, I know he's ascending, but you're taking a chance and you're basically saying, I'm willing to pay his ceiling price to get that ceiling. I believe that's his ceiling. I don't think there's any chance that Kenny Golladay finishes above guys like Devontae Adams or Julio Jones. So taking him at wide receiver 7, you're drafting him at a ceiling that he has not shown you quite yet.
Yates, what do you think?
I mean, counter argument, I think he's shown us that. He finished as the wide receiver 6 last year with Matthew Stafford throwing him the ball, and then experiments like Jeff Driscoll and David Blau. I think that he still produced in a big way last year. I have him at wide receiver 6. He statted out there for me. So I really like him. I have him with 120 targets and 9 touchdowns this year. I think that he's a monster in the red zone and someone who can be a factor to boost those receiving totals, those fantasy points with his projected receiving touchdowns. So I think that Golladay has shown that he has the immense ceiling. I'm buying into the fact that he's ascending, that Marvin Jones is descending. However, I still have Marvin Jones statted out for 104 targets. I don't think he's necessarily going completely away. This is just something that I'm buying into Matthew Stafford being a highly efficient quarterback again this season and, staying fully healthy. The downside, with Kenny Golladay is that we see Matthew Stafford get hurt again. And then we kind of have to roll the dice as far as, is Chase Daniel going to get it done? I don't think so.
Yeah.
So here's my counterpoint to that real quick. So Golladay, yes, he finished the wide receiver 6 last year, but last year was such a down year for wide receivers. It was kind of ridiculous, and we're not going to see that again. Like every now and then you'll get these blips on the radar where RBs have a crazy year and running backs are down. His stats from 2019 would have ranked as the number 12 wide receiver in 2018. I have him at wide receiver 11, so I think that it's very possible he does that. But remember, Matthew Stafford, before he got hurt, was on a ridiculous pace, like a pace that he's never done in his career, not one that's going to withstand the test of time. Like his yards per attempt was like 8.3 yards per attempt. Just once in his career had he averaged more than 7.5 yards per attempt. So I do not anticipate that happening again. So, and again, he did have some crappy quarterback play over the second half of the season, but he was getting more targets with Marvin Jones out of the lineup. So I am at wide receiver 11. I'm not saying Golladay sucks because I do think he is a good football player, but I'm just saying I do not want to pay for his ceiling. And that's basically what you're doing. I would much rather take a running back because basically wide receiver 7, you're taking him in the second round. That is way, way, way too early for me and Kenny Golladay.
I think my biggest takeaway from this discussion, to be honest, is that Marvin Jones is undervalued. Because I think Marvin Jones, right? That's really what it is. Every year, he's a guy who every year you're like, when you look at his numbers, well, he's healthy. I mean, they're not that different from, Golladay necessarily. I think for me, because I am, pretty much where consensus is on Golladay for most of the reasons Yates said, I think for the most part, it's really about the fact that Marvin Jones should be a lot higher. All right, Yates, let's move on to your next guy. Who do you have?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Sony Michel here. He's RB30 in ECR right now. I have him at RB41. No matter what your opinion is on Jarrett Stidham, some people think that he's going to be the next great quarterback. Some people are saying that there's no way this offense is going to be moving as efficiently as it was. And I mean, even last year, we didn't really see this offense be super efficient. They threw the ball 613 times, and so I think that no matter what your opinion is on Stidham, this is not going to be a top 10 offense in 2020. There are several other backs in this system that take away work from Sony Michel. He's never going to be a factor in the passing game. You are purely relying on Sony Michel receiving more than 250 carries and hitting high touchdown totals, rushing touchdown totals, which in this offense, there aren't going to be very many scoring opportunities for him, I believe. So looking at Sony Michel, it's hard to envision how he finishes as an RB3 this season. I have him just outside of that range.
Tags?
I understand this. I have him at wide RB34, so I'm in sync with you in terms of the fact that I think he's being overvalued by ECR. But this is one of those things where if you're one of those guys that wants to wait at running back, my advice would be if you wanted to grab Sony Michel, grab Damien Harris as well, because you're going to get him for free at the end of your draft. Get both of those running backs because I think one of them is going to be a weekly producer. He may not win you your fantasy football league. That I do agree with. But if you're waiting at running back, good luck finding that guy later in drafts. So if you're able to grab those guys, because if Sony slips up and he doesn't perform, if he keeps running for 3.7 yards per carry, they're going to move to Damien Harris, who did not play last year because he does not contribute on special teams. So if he's in the lineup, he's going to be getting carries. From what I've seen in the NFL from Sony Michel at this point, because I was a huge fan coming out of Georgia, I loved him. He looks like a different running back. He looks like crap. And now you put Stidham there, it's going to be a little bit, the coverage that he's going to see is going to be a little bit different. That offensive line they didn't play very well last year. So Damien Harris is a guy that's very downhill. He'll get what's blocked. I thought someone like Belichick would love him. So I think grabbing both of those, but again, you're wasting 2 spots on your roster for potentially one producer, which is tough to do. And that's why I'm probably not going to have a whole lot of Sony Michel. But if you do grab him, I would suggest getting Damien Harris too.
Yep, I think that's good advice. I don't love Sony Michel, but again, I have him, I think, where you have him tags. It's just, I do think he'll factor in at the goal line. And, if he does, generally speaking, should be fine. But it's a crowded backfield. He's nothing in the passing game. He's nobody I'm excited about drafting. But I do him a little higher than Yates, at least. All right, tags. Let's go on to your next guy. Who do you have?
All right, next one I have John Brown at wide receiver 37. Even last year, in a year that he saw over 100 targets, he was the guy on the perimeter. He basically was a wide receiver 3 all the time. He offered you a great floor, and that's what you want out of your wide receiver 3 if you can get it. But the thing is, he almost never gave you wide receiver 1 numbers. And now you add Stephon Diggs to this offense. You have Cole Beasley. Stephon Diggs coming in does not really affect Cole Beasley a whole lot in terms of the role that he plays in the team. He plays that safe outlet for Josh Allen, that guy that runs through the slot. This affects John Brown a lot. And those two are going to kind of cancel each other out because John Brown is a really good football player, but Stephon Diggs is a better football player, and he's going to get targets. When you trade, all the picks that they did for Stephon Diggs, he's going to be heavily involved. But this is still a team with a great defense, a team that's going to run the ball an awful lot. They do have the 1-2 punch of Devin Singletary and Zach Moss now. So the targets are going to be really, really hard to come by. And again, if this doesn't change Cole Beasley's role, who was a top 40, maybe even top 30 wide receiver last year, it's almost impossible to find 3 top 40 wide receivers on that football team. So Stephon Diggs, unless you're moving Stephon Diggs down into wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 territory, John Brown needs to be outside. It's really difficult to say that he's anything better than a wide receiver 4 at this point. I know wide receiver 37 is that range, but I have him at wide receiver 45. Wow. So probably a couple rounds later than where ECR has him right now.
Yeah, I heard a wow over there, Yates. Are you disagreeing?
I do disagree. I have him at wide receiver 30, and I think it's because, for me, looking at trying to divvy up these targets, I have Cole Beasley, Stephon Diggs, and John Brown all kind of mashed together. So, looking at their targets per game and breaking it down, Stephon Diggs I have at 7.2 targets per game, John Brown at 5.9, and Cole Beasley at 6.2. But looking at, I think John Brown's role is going to be stretching the field, getting those deep targets. Stephon Diggs is going to be working the intermediate levels of the field, and then you have Cole Beasley underneath. So I think that John Brown, he's not going to have as many targets as he did last year, but he's going to still maintain a very high yards per reception total, and he's going to score based on that yardage. If he's getting those opportunities, I think he's still going to score. So I definitely think that I could be a little bit higher based on what Tags was saying. I could be, a little bit way too high on, not a little bit way too high, that's oxymoron. A little bit high on John Brown here, but I think that he's someone who I'm still looking at, and I think his ADP, people are going to be super scared off of Stephon Diggs coming into town, which I don't think they should be.
All right. Well, look, I think you both made great points. I think, unfortunately for Yates, that Tags' points were obviously correct, as he and I are almost identical in our ranking of them. But yeah, that's bullish. I've met 43, I believe. Tag said, I believe 45. So yeah, for all the reasons Tag said, I'm inclined to agree with Tags, but I'll take another look. I'm not gonna do the Bobby where, man, you convinced me. I'm moving him up, but I will look. I will take another look at him. But Yates, let's move on to your next guy. Who do you have?
Yeah, I've got 2 of these guys on the same team, so I'll make the same argument for him at a different time. But I think Mike Williams is the guy who I'm going to focus on right here. This team, the LA Chargers, are taking a completely different approach. I guess I'll just say where I have him. So ECR right now is wide receiver 40. I have him at wide receiver 52. So I think even the consensus, these guys are, the experts are really off on him to begin with. But this team is taking a completely different approach than Kansas City and Las Vegas. You saw Las Vegas load up on firepower in the draft. Obviously, we know what Kansas City can do on offense. This team is moving in a completely different direction, which is going to be run the ball, control the clock, and try to keep the ball away from these dynamic offenses in the division. And they're going to try to win with defense. This is why we saw, I think, them move up and grab Kenneth Murray rather than drafting an offensive lineman. So, Tyrod Taylor, this offense is not going to pass the ball a ton. I have them for around 510 passing attempts. Tyrod Taylor has never been one to air it out downfield, and I think that this offense is just going to be, they're going to go through the ground game, and I don't think it leaves a ton of opportunities there for Mike Williams. If we, project that Justin Herbert is going to come in later on in the field, I think we could see some uptick for Mike Williams, but I don't think that he's someone who I want to go anywhere near as far as drafting, because I think you're going to be disappointed and he'll be on the waiver wire halfway through the season.
So let me just cut off some time here to make sure that we get this episode in. Tags, let me guess, you agree completely?
Yes. Mike Williams was the guy that I was going to put on my list until I found out that Yates had him on there.
And I have him at, you mentioned consensus is 40. You have him at 53. I'm at 51. So for all the reasons that you said, we all have a similar view of what the Chargers offense is going to look like this year. Love Mike Williams, the player, just not right now with Tyrod Taylor throwing him the ball. And the way that those games, I think they're going to rely on their defense. I think they're going to run the ball a ton. So I agree. We are all fading Mike Williams. All right, Tags. Next up, I think we're on number 5, but I may have lost count. Whatever. We'll get to it.
I'm just going to go. I talked about him quite a bit, and I don't know if I've talked with Yates a whole lot about him, but I'm fading Austin Ekeler at his price where he's at RB12 right now. We've talked about the fact that, that offense is going to take a step back as a whole. I know they want to run the ball, but I don't think their offensive line is built to run the ball like dominantly like a team like Minnesota does, for example, having the bookends. They don't even have a left tackle that we know of right now. Brian Bulaga, right tackle, it helps signing him in free agency, but Austin Ekeler is someone that's going to share the workload. It might be a 3-way timeshare between Justin Jackson and why am I forgetting his name right now? Joshua Kelly, the guy that drafted out of UCLA. I don't think they want Austin Ekeler to carry that. And if you look at his contract before it was done before the draft, they didn't pay him like a workhorse running back. And I think he knows exactly what his role is on that team. Not to say that he's not going to be valuable. I think he is valuable as an RB2. I think he's going to be fine there. But when you look at it and you say he's not the best first and second down running back, okay, Joshua Kelly might get more of that role, might get more goal line work. That's a negative. But then you look at the pass attempts, and if you start cutting those back, Austin Ekeler scored, I think it was like 70-something% of his fantasy points through the air last year. He had 108 targets. I don't think that they target their running back position 108 targets all in all this year. I think the pass attempts are cut back by that much with Phillip Rivers gone, that they go to Tyrod Taylor, Justin Herbert, young quarterback or a mobile quarterback, doesn't matter. Those pass attempts are coming down. Therefore, Austin Ekeler is going to lose a lot of those valuable targets that he's been getting. So, and not being tied to a high-scoring offense, all this stuff just means that it's way too expensive for my taste.
Yeah, I think he had 8 receiving touchdowns last year.
Yeah, he did.
That's insane. I mean, that's insane. That's clearly.
Wow, I didn't even realize that until just now.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, and look, to be fair, and I'll get to you in a second, Yates. I mean, I'm not particularly bearish on him. I have him, a couple spots lower than consensus, which was 12, I believe, is where consensus had him. And by the way, when we say consensus, I'm sorry, I should have said this earlier. It's half PPR consensus, which is how everybody submits their rankings to our accuracy competition. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be regression. I mean, he's not gonna. How many catches did he have last year? More than 90?
92.
Right? 92. That's just, there's no way.
No, he set the record. He had more fantasy points through the air than Christian McCaffrey did last year.
Yeah, he came, 993 receiving yards, 7 away from 1,000 as a running back is crazy.
That's not going to happen. But there are obviously positive things for him, considering, he is going to be the lead guy in this, out of curiosity, Yates, where do you have him?
I have him at RB15, and I think it's just because he's still going to see, I'm buying into an average depth of target narrative with Tyrod that I think he's going to want to stay close to the line of scrimmage, that I think that Austin Ekeler is still going to see, plenty of the targets here. I have him down for 95 targets with 4 receiving touchdowns. So I think he's still going to be involved. That puts him around that RB15 range for me.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the things. It wasn't only that Ekeler was targeted a ton last year. He had tons of deep targets. I mean, he had 4 catches of 20-plus air yards. That's not going to happen for him probably again for a running back, because it's just not how Tyrod Taylor is going to be leading the offense. All right, Yates, who do you have next?
I'm going to go super quick because he's the same team. It's Keenan Allen. I think I'm just going to be all hands off on this LA Chargers team. And it's just based on the fact that I still think Keenan Allen is going to lead this team in targets, but the receiving touchdowns just aren't going to be there with Tyrod at the helm there. And even if Justin Herbert does step in, we don't see rookie QBs, traditionally lead to a ton of receiving touchdown production for the wide receivers. So, Keenan Allen's someone I'm currently off of. I'll get his, he's wide receiver 20 right now. I have him at wide receiver 38.
Wow. Tags.
What's up?
What do you have? Tags, we're doing a podcast right now, and so what we do is we talk about, Keenan Allen, Tags.
I'm just messing with you, dude. You're like Tags. You didn't say anything behind it. I was like, what's up?
No, that's all. That's all I want.
No, Keenan Allen I have at 19. So I'm kind of with Yates in this one, where I'm not completely sold in this Chargers passing attack. Keenan Allen's a fantastic football player, but that doesn't always transcend. That doesn't show up in fantasy football all the time, and his targets are going to come down, as we've talked about with that offense. The entire team is going to suffer. They're all going to lose targets. including Keenan Allen, and he's that slot guy, so his average depth of target isn't so high. There's a lot to bake in there, but yeah, I think he's a low-end wide receiver too.
Yeah, so I side here more with tags. I'm at 22. I mean, 38 is that what you said, Yates? 38?
Yeah, he came out with 79 receptions, 832 yards, and only 4 touchdowns for me. So that's why he's a little bit down.
He never scores touchdowns, right? I mean,
No.
I don't think he's top 6.
He's never been,
right, since his rookie year. So it's not like that's going to be here. But I get it. I'm certainly not excited about Allen this year. But that is a pretty big ding. I mean, you're just out on the Chargers passing game, which is fine. It's hard to argue really with them.
Yeah.
All right, Tags, what do you got next?
All right, number 4, I think this is.
I believe so.
I'm going to go with Michael Gallup here. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 32, and I'm not going to talk too much about this because we just had Jason Moore on the show last week, and he said that he thought that Gallup was undervalued. I think he's overvalued by the consensus. He's a guy that his average depth of target is way up there. He only has it's slightly above 50% catch rate over his first 2 years in the league. He is a baller. I do like him, but at the same time, way too consistent to have in your lineup every single week with CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper there. So, yeah, I think at wide receiver 32, he's overvalued. So I'm curious where Yates is at on this one.
Yeah, I have him at wide receiver 43.
Yep,
All right.
I'm at 40. So,
Well, let's see. Hold on, let me see if I can channel Bobby. I'm gonna have to fight you on this one, man. I mean, is that good? Is that how it goes, basically?
That's is this Bobby? Am I talking to Bobby?
I am not bullish on Gallup compared to consensus, but I'm basically right where consensus is. I have him at 32. I get it that he has a lower floor at this point with Lamb, but remember there were 160 targets, more than that to Randall Cobb and Jason Witten last year. So it's not as if suddenly you're like, wow, you've got to spread out the targets. He averaged 79 receiving yards, and again, we talked a little bit about this with Sanders. If anything happens to Amari Cooper, and again, he battled through injury last year. I mean, Gallup, he's a guy who could potentially win you your league, with how good he is. So for me, at 32 as kind of a low-end wide receiver 3, I'm more than happy to take him where he is. I get both your points. I get what you're saying. But for me, right at consensus, I'm in line with him. So
I would take Brandon Cooks over him.
Yeah, that's crazy to me. I mean,
I would as well.
Oh, God. All right. Well, we got to bring Bobby back as host led on this one. But if we had more time, we get more into it. But let's move on here to Yates. Gad, who's your number 4?
Yeah, T.Y. Hilton. I have no idea why he is at wide receiver 23 in ECR. I do not understand it by any means. Hilton hasn't played 16 games since 2017. He was the wide receiver 57 last year. And I don't view Phillip Rivers as much of an upgrade over Jacoby Brissett. I think that Brissett was throwing to Zach Pascal as his lead guy last year with Hilton and Paris Campbell missing time. I don't think that Rivers, at this point in his career, let me be clear, at this point in his career is much of an upgrade over what we saw last year. So he was the predominant option in this offense. Michael Pittman is now in town and is going to command a significant target share. He's going to be on the field. So they're still going to be committed to the run game. It's hard to see Hilton receiving more than 6 targets per game, and he's going to have to stay healthy and put up crazy touchdown numbers, which he's never done. He's always been more of a yardage player, to return value on ECR wide receiver 23.
Out
of curiosity, Tags, are you in line with this? Because it sounded like you were.
I'm a wide receiver 29, so yes, I think he was someone that I was going to put on my list as well. It's weird this offseason, right? Like, we don't have a history on Phillip Rivers or Tom Brady going to a different team and understanding a new offense and the chemistry you have to develop with wide receivers. But knowing that there's been no offseason with T.Y. Hilton, I don't know. And Paris Campbell seems to be locked down in that slot role, and that's where T.Y. Hilton has done quite a bit of damage over his career. I'm really curious to see what his role is in this team, but yeah, I'm with Yates. I think as a wide receiver 3 is where I'd feel confident with him there, but as a wide receiver 2, no.
Yeah, this is again one where we'll disagree. I have him as right around consensus at 22, so even one spot higher. I mean, I don't love Hilton. I think a lot of this has to do with how we view Rivers, and I think it's completely fair if you look at last year and you're like, I don't really know what we're gonna get from Rivers at this point. I'm sorry, give me a sec, guys. I have my garage door is opening. If you can give me a sec.
I was like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, I apologize for that.
I thought it was my air conditioning or something kicking on.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, there we go again.
Now it's closing.
Yeah, that's it closing, guys. They're going on a walk. I have something. Sorry, I have something where I've told John to keep track of all our outtakes, which I think he was doing anyway because John's awesome. So hopefully we can have an outtake show. There's my garage door opening because my office is right above my garage. So anyway, all right, so I'll get back. I'll just start that part over. Yeah, so for me, I don't know. I'm a little more excited about Hilton this year. I have him at wide receiver 22, so one spot above the consensus. Again, I think a lot of this is how you view Phillip Rivers. If you view like the second half of last year as like, boy, Rivers just fell off a cliff and he's not going to be able to do anything, then yeah, you cannot be happy about drafting T.Y. Hilton. And I think the fact that we don't know what the offseason program is going to look like, that also sort of throws a wrinkle into it. But, I think he's not Jacoby Brissett, who was much more of a dink and dunk. You saw last year that Rivers was willing to push the ball down the field if he needed to. And remember, Rivers has played in Frank Reich's system. I know, Reich is the head coach, but whenever it was, he had his, maybe 2017 or whenever he was the offensive coordinator, he had his highest yards that he'd ever passed for in his career. So I think this offense is going to look good. I think a lot of what plagued Rivers last year was really just the line. I mean, he was pressured all the time. I think he started playing scared. I think that's what happened. The Colts have one of the best offensive lines in football. So I'm personally kind of, not excited about Phillip Rivers from a fantasy standpoint, but I view him as having a more of a bounce back season. And with that, I think that Hilton probably comes with it. So
as I've been, I'm going to throw out one name that I would take over T.Y. Hilton, and that's Tyler Boyd.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Okay, I'm going to check this right now just to see where I have Tyler
Adjust
Boyd.
your rankings. Trust me on that one.
Oh boy, I do not have him close. No, in my latest. No.
Oh boy.
All right. Look, I have Boyd below Michael Gallup, so deal with that. Yeah. So look, first of all, I will say that at this point, I'm constantly, as we are updating projections, constantly updating our rankings. But I'm sure T.Y. Hilton is going to come over above Boyd. Although I do like Boyd this year, I think he's going to be good, and we're not going to debate him right now. Let's go on to your next one, Tags. Go ahead.
All right, I'm going to go. This one seems to tick everybody off when I say it, but I'm going to say it anyways. Darius Slayton is the wide receiver 44. I almost didn't want to put him on the list because this is the territory you should be taking the chances, like on your guys, the guys that you like. But I don't like him. I don't like that offense. I don't think that he's going to have consistent enough targets to ever rely on him because Sterling Shepard is a guy that's the possession type receiver that's going to play on the perimeter. He can get down the field a little bit too. Golden Tate still in the offense has that slot presence, a guy that, again, is going to be a target hog. You have Saquon Barkley who's going to steal targets. You have Evan Engram who's going to be healthy, stealing targets. Darius Slayton is going to be the field stretcher, but what does that mean in an offense that's led by Daniel Jones? I think that there are a lot of parallels with Darius Slayton to someone like Robert Foster. If you guys remember last year, Robert Foster was a guy that at the end of the 2018 season had massive weeks, and people started talking about, over the last 5 weeks of the season, he was a wide receiver 4. I'm like, I don't care. I don't want Robert Foster on my football team. And now he's not even is he even in the league anymore? They may have
he's
cut
still
him.
in Buffalo, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, he still might be there, but there's so many parallels between these two, and I'm not saying that Slayton is a bad football player. I'm saying that I don't believe there's room in this offense to have I don't think any of them are going to be consistent enough to rely on as starters. So it's like best case scenario for Darius Slayton is that he has somewhat of a repeat that he did the last year, which was crazy efficient. Didn't have enough targets. There were weeks in there where he had 2-3 targets, and that's just not going to do it. So I don't like Darius Slayton. I'm at wide receiver 51.
Yates?
I'm there with Tags. I have him at 42. So I still think that he can definitely...
To be clear, let's stop. If you have him at 42, you are not with Tags. You are
above
Tags
consensus.
What was ECR?
44.
Oh, I'm
44.
sorry. I didn't hear that. No,
so
then I'm against Tags.
It started again and be like, Tags is way off base on this because... right?
Tags is way off base on this because... No, I think that, Tags brought up the argument that when you're in this range of wide receiver 4, you're looking at guys who could potentially, have huge upside. And I think that Darius Slayton has huge upside if we see some of these other, receiving options go down. If, Sterling Shepard has one more concussion, guys, I think he might be done in the league. I think that's a legitimate concern. And so that opens up plenty of targets. I was talking about a couple of these other teams that I have these guys all grouped together. New York, it's super hard to find out where these targets are going to go as far as a significant leaning one way or the other. They're all grouped together for me. So Darius Slayton certainly has the upside if everything goes his way, and I think last year everything went his way.
Yeah. For me, honestly, it's weird because when I think about, just don't forget about my rankings for a second. I'm like, all right, what do I think of Darius Slayton right now? I'm like, no, I don't really want any part of him. And yet I'm exactly where Yates is, which, to be clear, Yates is high on Darius Slayton. I have him at 42. as well for a lot of the reasons you said. The only thing I'm going to point out is this. I'm looking at my projections right now. And the difference between Slayton and whatever my number 50th wide receiver is, who is Golden Tate, is 7 half PPR points over the course of a full season, right?
Yep. That's exactly what I have.
So, yeah, exactly. So
no, Dan, exactly. Golden Tate is 50, and I have him down
maybe
for
I'm
7
accidentally looking at
Are you just taking my rankings?
No, 42 at Slayton and 50 at Tate. Yeah, it's
That's
7
crazy.
Fantasy points based on projection. So, again, this is something where, I don't think either one of us Yates is like, yeah, Darius Slayton, but at the end, there's such little between those guys that little tiny changes can do things. All right, Yates, let's move on. I believe number 3 we're at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to go with Marquise Brown here. He's currently wide receiver 34 in ECR. I have him at wide receiver 44. So I can't stress this enough. There's not much difference here between these lower tier rankings, but I did want to mention this. Brown finished 2019 with 7 touchdowns. There were 5 games where Brown was able to reel in a minimum of 1 touchdown. So those weeks were week 1, 5, 10, 12, 15. Okay. So what did those weeks look like for a fantasy finish when averaged out? He finished as the wide receiver 16 in those weeks. That's great. However, on the weeks that Brown didn't score a touchdown, the fantasy finish is not great. Brown averaged out to be the wide receiver 73 in those weeks. So per PFF, the Ravens scored 19 touchdowns out of the slot last season. I think Devin Duvernay is more of a threat in this offense than people are realizing right now. He's going to be taking away targets from Marquise Brown, and the lack of passing volume combined with just Brown is one of those guys who's super volatile week in and week out. Yes, he was dealing with coming off the injury last year. I don't want to ignore that. I don't want to pretend that that's not there, but you could never decide what week Brown was going to hit last week, and I think that's going to continue into this season.
I agree with a lot of the things you said, outside of the fact that Devin Duvernay is a non-factor for me. But Marquise Brown he's a baller who's not going to be coming off foot surgery. Second year in the offense, they're going to throw the ball more than 439 times. He's like that guy that you draft as your guy, and you say, you know what, I know he's the best player on that team in terms of as a pass catcher among the wide receivers, and you say, if they do increase those pass attempts, and they move more towards the wide receiver now that they traded away Hayden Hurst, they cleared up some of those targets there, do they do that? And I could understand how someone gets to the point where they're saying they want Marquise Brown in their fantasy teams because he could break fantasy football. He's like a Will Fuller type of receiver, in the fact that if he gets a consistent 7-8 targets, those are worth much more than someone like, let's say, a Sterling Shepard getting 10 targets. I would rather take the 7 or 8 targets from Marquise Brown. So I have him at 38, so I am a little bit, or 36, so I'm 2 spots lower than the consensus, but I still understand the side of the argument why people want him. He's a fantastic football player tied to a quarterback that got better, and if they throw more, you can see the avenue to targets for him.
Yeah, I'm at 35, so I'm right there with you, Tags. Again, it basically last year was so historically low in terms of what the Ravens were doing from a passing standpoint that if they just kind of, increase that just a bit, Brown stock should go up. But again, he's not a guy who I'm like, yeah, this is a guy who I'm really excited about this year, and this is a guy who I want to target or anything like that. All right, Tags, number 2.
All right, this one hurts because, again, I hate saying against good football players, but A.J. Brown, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 16 right now. That's borderline wide receiver 1, guys. You're getting up there. That's high-end wide receiver 2 numbers. And I know he was, over the second half of the season, he was a monster. He finished as the number 8 wide receiver from week 7 through week 16. That's great, right? But the issue is that he ranked during that time 47th in targets. He broke a lot of plays, like yards after the catch. I think he averaged over 8 yards after the catch, which is unsustainable. You're legitimately going to cut that number in half. Even if you're great after the catch, you're not going to consistently average over 5 yards after the catch. It just doesn't happen in the NFL. So A.J. Brown, as good as he is at football, he's going to regress in terms of his efficiency. I don't think that this team ever goes to a hardcore passing attack where they're going to throw the ball 600 times. So you have to dial back expectations. I love him as a player. If you can draft him as a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3, with hopes that that they do get him more targets, okay. But 47th in targets from the time he entered the starting lineup, that's not enough to get me up to wide receiver 16, guys.
How about you, Yates?
I've met 15. So I'm buying in. However, I am in no way projecting that he is going to finish with 20 yards per reception, which is I think what he averaged last year. Like it was ridiculous. You don't do that as a wide receiver. So I do think that he sees some uptick in targets just purely based on the fact that I don't think Corey Dave, like you have to find a place for the targets to go in this offense. Derrick Henry's not going to be it. Darrington Evans is going to see some. Corey Davis isn't going to be the main guy. Adam Humphries was a healthy scratch in some games last year, if I remember correctly. Like, he wasn't on the field. So unless you're projecting Jonnu Smith with 130-something targets, like, you need to be giving A.J. Brown some uptick in his target totals from last year. However, I do have his efficiency going way down. So that's why I do still have him up at 15, though. But I totally get Tags' argument there.
Ditto, and I have him at 13. So it's one of these things where Tags, I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying.
Yeah.
I completely get it. First player in NFL history to have 1,000 or more receiving yards on fewer than 90 targets. That's nuts. I love his talent. I just feel like, exactly kind of what Yates says. I do think that the targets are going to come up this year, and I do think that the efficiency is going to go down, but in the end, I don't know. I think when you have mashed it all in, it's borderline, probably wide receiver 2, and but borderline wide receiver 1.
I want to ask you guys real quick, since like we both basically share the same point of view here. Where do you guys have Mecole Hardman ranked?
Oh, I have Hardman way down there.
Because he's someone that was extremely efficient. And I almost put him on this list, but I was like, no, I understand why people want to draft him, but I'm lower. I have him at 57 among wide receivers, but I can easily see why someone would want to draft him around that wide receiver 48 range.
Yeah, I have 53. So I'm also not, I'm around where you are. I don't know where you are, Yates. Although I'm probably looking at your rankings, so probably.
Right. No, I actually have him down in the 70s, but he should be higher than that. That's an oversight on my part.
Yeah, it is clearly. Go fix that right now. All right, but before you do, give me your number 2 player.
So I'm going to go with Cooper Kupp here. ECR, wide receiver 15. I have him at 33, and this is why. The Rams offense shifted after their bye week last year towards running more 12 personnel. From weeks 1 through 9 last season, Kupp was the wide receiver 5, which is outstanding. It's incredible. However, after the bye week, Kupp saw his total snaps go down, and he averaged 5.875 targets per game in those 8 games. In that time frame, he was the wide receiver 31, and that 5.875 targets would have put him on pace for only 94 targets, which isn't going to get it done if that's his projected target share this offseason or this upcoming season. We saw the Rams, like, if they're going to revert back to running heavy 11 personnel, which I'll explain that 11 personnel is 1 running back, 1 tight end on the field. If you have 12 personnel, it's 1 running back, 2 tight ends on the field, and 2 wide receivers. Cooper Kupp is not an outside wide receiver. He only comes onto the field to play the slot. And so in that instance, you're going to have Robert Woods on the field, and you're going to have either one of Josh Reynolds or Van Jefferson being that guy on the outside. I believe that it's going to be Josh Reynolds to start the season. So, Cooper Kupp is only going to come onto the field in those instances. They're going to keep Tyler Higbee, Gerald Everett on the field to compensate for their poor offensive line play, which they didn't address this offseason until the 7th round of the NFL draft. So this is the offensive philosophy moving forward this year. I think Robert Woods is an incredible buy. He's a player that I'm targeting everywhere. Cooper Kupp is a big, big fade for me.
Tags, do you agree?
I have Cooper Kupp at 18, and I could see the case to move him down. I've thought about this a lot because you're right about the 11 and 12 personnel with him. But at the same time, I think Sean McVay is a smart enough guy to know that Jared Goff, he's better when Cooper Kupp's on the field.
Right.
He's better when he's targeting him. And you even go back to a year or two ago, the last 2 years before, I'll even say before the second half of the 2019 season, this is a team that didn't utilize the tight end a whole lot. And teams will adjust, and Sean McVay will change things because that's what he does. That's why I like him as a head coach. I believe he adapts to things as they're going on. But knowing that, the running backs aren't going to be, like Todd Gurley being gone, I was actually shocked to see just how little the Rams used their running backs in the receiving game last year. But I just think that he's a good football player. He plays in an offense where, for a smart offensive mind, and Jared Goff does do better when he's targeting Cooper Kupp than he does any other wide receiver. So I feel weird about him. Like I feel like he should be drafted as like a low end wide receiver 2 with upside for more. And I think that even the downside is like you mentioned, I think you were saying he was like wide receiver 30 something in that stretch. So I think that's the downside in him, is that he's like a low end wide receiver 3. So getting him in between that wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3 territory feels good. I have him ranked right around that wide receiver 18, wide receiver 20 range.
Yeah, it's really tough to know what to do with him because of how it was a tale of two seasons for him, right? Yeah. I mean, and if they are going to do what they did over the last 5 games or whatever it was, where he's playing roughly 65% of the snaps, he's getting a 15% target share, then yeah, he's going to really disappoint. But it's unclear, like you said, Tags. I mean, Jared Goff is better when he's targeting Cooper Kupp. So, with McVay makes the adjustments this year, it's just he's one of the harder players, I think, to project because we really don't know the philosophy that they're going to put in.
Yeah, and I'll mention it super quick. I'll mention this super quick. Like, I have him down for 112 targets, but Cooper Kupp scored 10 touchdowns last season. I don't think that's happening this season anywhere close to that. So in that range where I do have guys who are in that 100 to 120 target range, for them to ascend in my rankings, they have to have high touchdown totals, which Cooper Kupp isn't going to be that. He's not this guy who gets the ball in the red zone regularly. So Cooper Kupp, he's going to have high reception totals and high yardage, so he could be great in a full PPR, but I just don't think that he's going to have the touchdown upside there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, Tags, last guy. What do you got?
Yeah, number 1, another good football player, but just in the wrong offense, utilized the wrong way, and it's Josh Jacobs at RB13. He's actually moved down. He was at one point up to like RB10, and I didn't get it, and I'm still lower than the consensus on him because he plays for a Raiders team that, let's be real, this under Greg Olsen, they are not going to be a top 10 scoring offense. He scored 7 touchdowns in 13 games last year. He's actually going to regress in that aspect. I believe I have him down for 7 touchdowns on the year on the ground. And they talked about, we're going to use him more in the passing game. Well, he saw 27 targets last year. That's like Derrick Henry-esque. And for a guy that's a great receiver. But then they go out and they re-sign Jalen Richard, which all he does is catch passes. They draft Lynn Bowden. And it's like, where are these coming from? Where are the targets going to come from? You added more pass catchers. You added more tight ends. I don't see where the targets come from. I have him projected right now at 34 targets. And I feel like I'm being generous. And it's not because his talent's not there, because it absolutely is. But when you combine the fact that it's not a top 10 scoring offense, when you combine the fact that he's not going to get a whole lot of targets, it's really difficult to say that he should be considered as an RB1 when there's guys on the board that play for high scoring offenses that are involved in the passing games.
How about you, Yates?
I've him at running back 9, but I totally get where Tags is coming from. The difference is that I have him with 9 rushing touchdowns. If I take away those and go to Tags' 7, then he drops a little bit down my rankings. So I totally get it. As far as the passing total, I have him for 41 targets. So again, see where Tags is coming from. I could definitely bump that down because, yeah, he did only see that, Derrick Henry-esque target numbers last year. It's frustrating because he's so good as a receiver out of the backfield. So I definitely, I like him this year. I have him at 9, obviously, but I could see the argument to pull him down my rankings a little bit there.
Legitimately, if you take your 41 targets and you make them 42 targets, then you and I are identical. I have him ranked 9th. I have him scoring 9 touchdowns, but I have him for 42 targets. So it's exactly the same. Tags, you do make a lot of great points. But yeah, I'm identical with Yates on this one. So
yeah, to be clear, I don't think Josh Jacobs is someone that's going to ruin your chances at winning a fantasy championship, because RB13, you're talking like late second, early third. That's fine. It's just it happens to do with the guys that I have ranked ahead of him. But that's where it's saying it's really difficult to argue with experts and analysts, because we've all gone through this, and I think that's why we agree on a lot of these, is because it's like there's like these minuscule differences with projections that can lead you to RB9 or RB15. That's where I have them. So.
All right, Yates, take us home. What do you got?
Final one here, Evan Engram. Someone please explain to me why Evan Engram is tight end 6 in ECR. I have no idea. He appeared in 15 games in 2017, 11 in 2018, 8 in 2019. He finished as a tight end 5 in 2017, which I think is still driving this narrative that he's a really, really good tight end and deserves to be ranked up there. He finished as a tight end 12 in 2018 and the tight end 18 in 2019. I just do not understand why we're ranking this guy as a top 6 option. When we talked about Darius Slayton, this is a crowded offense, and you're looking at these guys and trying to divvy up these targets. I have no idea. I do not understand. Where do you guys have Evan Engram, and why do you think he's all the way up there at tight end 6?
I have him at tight end 6 just because that's kind of where he falls. It's easy to find a path to targets for him, I guess, because they've been there. And you make good points, and that's I don't think I'll own any Evan Engram. For me, it's either I get one of the top 4 or 5 tight ends, or I wait. Because I'm not going to reach for Tyler Higbee. I'm not going to reach for Hunter Henry. I'm not going to reach for Evan Engram. But he's a guy that you separate the wide receiver and tight end targets. He is a guy that turned into a better blocker than I think anybody could have anticipated. But he hasn't stayed on the field. The Giants did talk about trading him. They do have a lot of mouths to feed there. I talked about that with Darius Slayton. And the targets that do correlate with each other are tight end and running back. So if you start saying, well, you don't want to take some targets away from Saquon Barkley, all of a sudden Evan Engram doesn't look appealing. And that's why I probably won't own a whole lot of him or the guys in that range. I'm just going to wait on Hayden Hurst and draft him everywhere.
Yeah, I'm 7th, so I'm right around where Tags is. And I get that last year was a little different because of the various injuries and, Tate was suspended. But he played 8 games last year. He had at least 7 targets in 7 of them, so he has seen targets. Whether it's going to be the same this year, obviously a little different. Saquon was injured last year. Tate was suspended for the first 4 games. But, he's got the talent. And I think maybe we can sum it up with all your tight ends are trash. Because tight end is just a wasteland. And again, I like the position a little more this year than I usually do. But if he's healthy, I think, out of curiosity, did you say where you actually have him, Yates?
I have him at tight end 18.
Ooh.
So this is someone who I do not want. I mean, I have him with 78 targets. And this is the issue, is that where are you going to pull the targets away from? Are Dan, you talked about Golden Tate is going to be targeted when he's on the field. Sterling Shepard is going to be targeted when he's on the field. This is Jason Garrett's offense, where I think it's going to run through Saquon Barkley, where I just don't think that they're going to be. I have him down for 560 pass attempts on the season. So unless you guys have, the New York Giants throwing for, close to 600 times, then I can see where the targets come from for Evan Engram. Otherwise, I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, this is one where a couple of things. Number one, I need to almost immediately after this podcast ends see your tight end rankings because you have guys all, Irv Smith is like not even on the board and stuff like that. I think you're just like a hot tight end ranker. You know what I mean? Like you really go there. But yeah, I think the bottom line for me is find me guys who I'm like excited about at tight end at this point. Engram has shown that he does have talent. In the end, it's just, again, one of these things where if I'm looking between the difference between my projections for Engram and my projection for the guy at number 12, it's like 10 fantasy. It's not a crazy amount at this point, but for me, I don't know, man. I'm good to stick closer to consensus on this one as opposed to, you're not touching him in one tight end league, so it is your prerogative. All right, guys, we made it. 10. I loved it. Good discussion here. Good back and forth. I might have been looking at Yates' rankings. I don't know, but in the end, it was good catching up. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bobby should be back later in this week to discuss some breakout candidates, and we'll talk to you then.
Thanks for tuning into the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Make sure to check out our featured videos as well. Also, make sure to click that red subscribe button to get notified when we post videos in the future.